Welcome! Today we shall delve into possibly one of the biggest weapons in a GM's world-building arsenal. A powerful servant but a horrible master. A vast library of characters, motivations, themes and places. Today we shall be discussing tropes. Now, most of you are probably familiar with what tropes are, but for the sake of thoroughness, I will describe them anyway. They are storytelling devices used repeatedly in all kinds of stories, so much so that using them will often bring the player a kind of familiarity. Now, this sounds great and all, but let's emphasize this by an example. The party finds themselves in a violent scuffle with a big burly orc with a battle axe. Even though he is outmatched and outnumbered, he seems to be having the best time of his life. He's covered in blood and bruises, but he ignores any pain, he's just laughing. The party eventually defeats him but decide not to kill him. Once he wakes up, he isn't raging or angry. He is calm. He menacingly comes to the party and after a brief intense pause, he offers them a handshake. They have gained his respect. Now many of you possibly have some sort of déjà vu. You have been in this place before. You have seen this type of character. That's because this is a typical outline of a Blood Knight trope. A moniker shared by characters such as Hulk from Marvel, Ogren from Dragon Age Origins, every single Krogan from Mass Effect, or Zod from Berserk. From just this small display alone, you can present your players with a familiar character with no narration and no forced dialogue, and minimal effort. Not every character needs to be a nuanced 10-page backstory edgelord with hidden motives and a 4-hour introduction that tells nothing of their character. Now, this doesn't work for just characters. Tropes for places are plenty too. For example, a beautifully utopian city on the outside that is actually dystopian Orwellian hellhole. A hidden forest village serving as a sanctuary for all and a place of healing, and so on and so forth. But all things considered, I advise you not to rely on tropes alone when making stuff in your world. Don't let things be completely defined by their tropes. If the aforementioned orc character was exactly just what you would expect, players would probably quickly lose interest in them. A good way to add depth to a tropified character, place or story is to deconstruct the trope, which practically means to delve deeper into why the thing is the way it is, or take the trope and apply it into a realistic setting and try to think of the ramifications. What if the orc behaves like a blood knight because the orcs in your settings experience an inherent bloodlust in battle, which practically pumps their system with extreme amounts of adrenaline and drug-like substances, and he is basically an addict that tries to sate his addiction with combat? This is quite a drastic example. It doesn't have to be this grim or excessive, but I wanted to make my point. So I think tropes alone should be used like an emergency crutch if you need to quickly characterize a thing you don't have fully prepared, or if you want to immediately affect your players in some way. And of course, if you have a burnout or if you are running out of ideas, going to TV tropes and reading about all the possible tropes to use can give much needed inspiration. Also, there is one important thing to realize. Tropes are not exclusive to just a GM. They will very likely be used by your players as well, because from my experience, players usually play either an exaggerated version of themselves or a trope character. And if they are using a trope character, they often are inspired by a different character from different media, and they very probably want to feel like that character a bit. They want to experience your world through lens of a certain type of character. Well, and if that is the case, why not use that? If your player's character reminds you of a certain trope or of a specific different character, why don't you use it to tailor some of your stories for them? How were similar characters challenged in different media? What trials did they face? Now, I'm not telling you to replicate these stories beat for beat. If your player's Harry Potter ripoff gets dragged into an adventure because they find out that Voltmeter, the villain from their backstory, is trying to create the Philosopher's Stone to regain their body, but that stone is kept safe in the treasury of a castle magically protected by enchantments conjured by 7 powerful wizards, well, that might break the immersion of your world very quickly. But it does sound like a very dope dungeon now that I think about it. But anyway, and since we are talking about player backstories, there is some kind of off-topic thing I would like to add. If your player gives you a pre-written backstory, that is a goddamn gift. It doesn't matter if what they wrote doesn't exactly correlate with your world. There is nothing easier than talking to them and sorting out what works and what doesn't. Firstly, your players often can have better ideas than what you have, and if their backstory mentions a thing you don't have in your world, well, adding that thing is often a great addition, and your player will have a connection to it because they consider it theirs. And secondly, there are only a few better ways to make your players invested than using something from their backstory, no matter how minuscule it was, and connecting it to your story. It doesn't matter if to their advantage or disadvantage. But if you do this, it's important to realize that one player shouldn't permanently have a spotlight on them. There is nothing wrong with giving a spotlight every now and then. Most players are absolutely okay with resolving a different player's personal quest, but the entire plot shouldn't circle just one player's backstory. But enough with this tangent, I've wasted enough of your time. But to end this video, let's look at the most important trope in the history of literature, the staple of any good fanfiction, anime, and Dragon Age out of all things. For those of you Dragon Age fans out there who won't believe me, read the calling, will you? The ability to magically cure the most serious wounds and afflictions with your and that's about it. As always, this is not everything that is to be said about tropes. If you want a deeper dive into specific tropes, there is a YouTube channel called Overly Sarcastic Productions that I can't recommend enough. But the tavern's closing for now. You are all welcome when we open again. Farewell.